Hello, friend. Welcome to Science for Sleep. Tonight, we are spending time with a plant that has been part of human life for a very long time. Turmeric may seem simple at first. Many people know it only as a yellow powder in a jar, or as one of the warm flavors hiding inside a curry, a soup, or a pot of rice. But turmeric has lived a much larger life than that. For around 4,000 years, people have cooked with it, colored with it, carried it through trade, and woven it into daily routines so old that their beginnings have become difficult to see. That alone makes turmeric interesting. Most things in a modern kitchen feel recent, easy, replaceable. But turmeric is older than many cities, older than many borders, older than many of the food traditions people now think of as permanent. Long before it sat on a grocery shelf, it was growing quietly in warm soil, hidden below the ground, waiting to be cut, dried, ground, mixed, and passed from hand to hand. And then there is its color. Turmeric is not pale or shy. It holds a deep golden yellow, sometimes almost orange, bright enough to stain fingers, wooden spoons, cloth, and stone. It is the kind of color that people notice right away. In fact, that color became so important that turmeric was used not only as food, but also as a dye. It could leave its mark on fabric as easily as on a pot of stew. There is something almost surprising about that one small underground plant could move so easily between the kitchen and the world of color. If you enjoy these quiet journeys, you're welcome to subscribe. And if it feels natural, to leave a comment sharing where you're listening from tonight. It helps others find their way to this calm corner of the world, one sleepy traveler at a time. The quiet continues here, just as it is. Turmeric also carries another small mystery that many people have heard without always knowing why. It is often mentioned with black pepper. The two appear together again and again in recipes, drinks, and health conversations. Part of that is taste, of course, but part of it is chemistry. Inside turmeric is a compound called curcumin, the natural pigment most responsible for that rich golden color. Curcumin has drawn attention for many years, yet on its own, it is not absorbed very easily by the body. Black pepper contains piperine, and that compound can help increase how much curcumin the body takes in. So even a familiar pairing at the dinner table turns out to contain a quiet scientific story. That is one of the loveliest things about plants like turmeric. They seem settled, known, ordinary. And then, with a closer look, they begin to widen. A kitchen spice becomes an old trade good. A strong color becomes a dye. A common recipe pairing becomes a question of plant chemistry and absorption. The more closely you look, the more it becomes clear that turmeric is not only an ingredient. It is a small meeting place between botany, history, cooking, culture, and the slow attention of generations. And still, for all of that, turmeric remains something humble. It does not flash across the sky or roar through the sea. It grows quietly. It waits underground. It enters human life not through force, but through repetition. A little in the pot, a little on the cloth, a little in the hand. Over time, that quiet presence becomes tradition, then memory, then something so familiar that people stop wondering where it came from at all. Tonight, we will stay with that question a little longer. We will slow down enough to notice the plant itself, the color it carries, the places it has traveled, and the reasons people kept returning to it century after century. There is something deeply calming about giving attention to one ordinary thing and discovering that it is not ordinary at all. For all the bright color and long human history surrounding turmeric, the plant itself begins in a quieter way than many people expect. It does not first announce itself through flowers or fruit. It does not hang on branches or rise high above the ground. The part people care about most develops low and hidden, beneath the surface, out of sight in dark, warm soil. Turmeric is a flowering plant in the ginger family. That family includes other plants people know well, especially ginger itself, and the resemblance becomes easier to notice once the comparison is made. Both grow leafy green stems above ground. Both form thick underground structures that store energy. Both are dug up rather than picked, and both carry strong scents that are released the moment they are cut open. The part we use is often called the root in everyday speech, but it is actually something a little different. It is a rhizome, an underground stem that grows sideways through the soil. That may sound like a small detail, but it helps explain the way turmeric lives. A root mostly anchors a plant and draws in water and nutrients. A rhizome does more than that. It stores food, spreads, and helps the plant begin again. It is a hidden body built for waiting, holding, and returning. That makes turmeric a very patient plant. Above the ground, turmeric grows broad green leaves that can look soft and tropical, almost lush in the heat. In the right conditions, it can also produce pale flowers rising from the base, with forms that feel neat and almost sculpted. But the great weight of the plant's importance is not above the soil. It is below, where the rhizome slowly thickens over time, taking in the season and quietly building itself. Fresh turmeric rhizomes are not especially grand to look at from the outside. They are knobby, uneven, and earthy, with a rough skin that can seem plain at first glance. There is mud in the folds. There are small branching fingers reaching outward. They look practical more than beautiful. But the moment one is sliced open, the plain surface gives way to that startling interior, a deep yellow-orange so rich that it almost seems painted rather than grown. That contrast may be one reason turmeric left such a strong impression on human life. The outside is modest, the inside is luminous. There is something calming about that pattern. A plant can live most of its life in silence, underground, absorbing warmth and rain, forming itself in darkness, and still carry such brightness within it. The soil above gives little sign of what is slowly taking shape below. Leaves wave in the air, rain falls, days pass, and all the while the rhizome stores color, scent, and the compounds that will one day be dried, ground, cooked, mixed, and carried elsewhere. Turmeric grows best where the world gives it time to stay warm. It likes rich soil, moisture, and a long season without cold. In that way, it belongs naturally to tropical and subtropical places, where the ground does not rush the plant and where the rhythm of growth can stay steady. It is not built for frost. It is built for heat, for wet earth, for slow thickening underground. When farmers grow turmeric, they usually do not begin with seeds. They begin with pieces of rhizome. One living piece is set into the soil, and from that peace new growth rises. This is another reason turmeric feels like a plant of continuity. It does not always begin again from something tiny and separate. Often it continues from itself, one stored body becoming the source of the next. The harvest is not only an ending, but also the material for another cycle. So much of turmeric's life is like that. Quiet continuation, hidden growth, return. It is easy in modern life to meet turmeric only at the very end of its journey, as powder shaken from a jar into hot oil or stirred into rice. But before it becomes that fine dust, it is a living underground structure full of water, fiber, pigment, and stored energy. It is something cut from the earth, washed, handled, and transformed. And the more closely you picture that buried shape in the dark soil, the easier it becomes to understand why turmeric feels so old, so grounded, and so closely tied to the places where it grows. Because before it became a spice, turmeric was first a patient tropical plant, building its golden body beneath the ground. That hidden golden body is one of the first things that makes turmeric feel so memorable. Fresh from the ground, it does not look dramatic right away. Its skin is dull and earthy, a little rough, sometimes dusty, sometimes still carrying traces of wet soil. But the moment the rhizome is cut open, the inside seems to glow. The color is so rich, so warm, and so sudden that it can feel almost out of proportion to the plain shape holding it. Turmeric is not bright in the way a flower is bright. It does not use color to call from a distance. Its color is tucked away, held inside the plant itself, protected under a thin outer layer until a knife, a fingernail, or a break in the skin reveals it. That hidden quality gives the color a strange kind of force. It is not displayed, it is discovered. The deep yellow-orange tone comes mostly from a group of natural compounds called curcuminoids, with curcumin being the best known of them. Curcumin is the main pigment people think of when they think of turmeric. It is what gives the rhizome its famous golden look. It is also one reason turmeric became so important to human beings, because color is rarely just color in human life. Once people notice a plant strongly enough, they begin to use it in more than one way. Turmeric's color is difficult to ignore. A small piece of fresh turmeric can stain fingers within moments. A spoonful of the powder can turn a whole pot of rice yellow. A little paste can mark cloth, bowls, cutting boards, and hands. The pigment spreads quickly, and it stays. That staying power is part of what gave turmeric such a large life beyond the field. People did not need special instruments to know this plant carried something unusual. Their eyes told them at once. There is something almost restful about the honesty of that. Turmeric does not hide what it can do for long. Its color tells the story before words do. And yet the color is not always exactly the same. Fresh turmeric often looks deeper and more vivid than the dry powder most people know. The powder is still strong, of course, but it feels softer somehow, a little more settled. The fresh rhizome can seem brighter, almost glowing with moisture and life. Light catches on the wet cut surface. The orange-yellow seems denser, more alive. Once dried and ground, turmeric becomes easier to store and use, but some of that living freshness gives way to the steadier look of a spice meant to travel. Even then, the color remains powerful enough to shape how food feels before it is ever tasted. A broth touched with turmeric seems warmer just by sight. Rice looks richer. Lentils appear deeper and more nourishing. The eyes begin their work before the tongue does. A dish that carries turmeric often looks as though it has absorbed sunlight, as though something bright has been folded into it. That may be part of why turmeric stayed close to human life for so long. People are drawn to visible change. We notice when plain water becomes golden. We notice when pale cloth becomes yellow. We notice when a muddy piece of underground plant opens to reveal a color that seems almost too vivid to belong to the earth. Turmeric changed what it touched, and that made it feel useful, meaningful, and alive. Its color could even shift a little depending on what it met. In different mixtures, and especially in more alkaline conditions, turmeric can move toward a deeper orange or reddish tone. That gives the pigment an almost sensitive quality, as though it responds to the world around it. Not dramatically, but enough to remind us that plant colors are not fixed decorations. They are chemistry made visible. So much of turmeric's story begins there, in the simple act of seeing. Before anyone studied curcumin in a lab, before anyone spoke of absorption or compounds, people already knew this plant mattered because they could see its effect with their own eyes. It left color behind. It changed the look of food, of cloth, of hands, of tools. It made itself known in the quietest and most direct way. And once a plant begins leaving that kind of mark, it is not likely to remain only a hidden thing in the soil. Once turmeric's color is seen clearly, it becomes easy to understand why it did not remain only a food. A pigment that strong almost seems to ask for more than one life. It does not stay politely inside the plant. It reaches outward. It clings. It spreads. It settles into whatever it touches. And for a very long time, human beings noticed that and made use of it. One of the simplest truths about turmeric is that it stains. Anyone who has cooked with it knows this almost at once. A little dust on the counter leaves a yellow trace. A spoon dragged through a pot comes out bright at the edges. Fingertips hold the color long after the cooking is done. Even the soft grain of a wooden board can take on a faint golden cast. There is something gentle but stubborn about the way turmeric leaves itself behind. That stubbornness made it useful. Long before modern synthetic dyes, people looked to the natural world for color. Plants, minerals, bark, flowers, insects, and roots all became part of that search. Turmeric joined that older world of color, not because it was rare, but because it was visible, strong, and available. Once dried and ground, it could be mixed with water, oils, or other substances to create vivid yellow and yellow-orange tones. Cloth could be touched by it. Thread could be touched by it. Skin could be touched by it. Surfaces that were pale before could be changed in a matter of moments. There is a quiet beauty in that. A plant hidden underground spends months gathering pigment, and then that pigment leaves the soil and enters human life as brightness. Turmeric was especially suited to this kind of use because yellow has always carried a special kind of attention. It is warm without being harsh. It feels bright without the severity of white. It can suggest sunlight, warmth, life, ripeness, celebration, sacredness, and care, depending on where and how it is used. Human beings do not respond to color in a neutral way. We attach meanings to it, even before we fully realize we are doing so. So a plant that could produce a color this rich did more than make things beautiful. It gave people a visible way to mark importance. That is one reason turmeric moves so naturally between the kitchen and ceremonial life. Food and ritual often live close together. So do color and meaning. A substance that can season a pot and also leave a golden trace on cloth or skin is already doing more than one kind of work. It is feeding, marking, and signaling all at once. Still, turmeric was never the most permanent dye in every situation. That too is part of its story. Some natural dyes hold fast for a very long time, especially when fixed carefully with the right materials. Turmeric is vivid, but its brilliance can fade with long washing, strong light, or time. In that sense, it belongs to a softer kind of color, not weak, but living, present, temporary in some settings, lasting in others. It does not always aim to outlast everything. Sometimes it only needs to brighten the moment it is given. That feels right for a plant like this. Its color is powerful, but not cold. It enters the world warmly. It lingers where it can. It softens where it must. Even in the kitchen, turmeric behaves a little like a dye. When it enters hot oil, broth, rice, or lentils, it does not only add flavor, it changes the appearance of the whole dish. A small amount can turn something plain into something glowing. The liquid becomes golden. The grains become yellow. The surface of the food begins to look deeper, fuller, more finished. In that way, cooking with turmeric is already a kind of dyeing. The food is not only seasoned, it is colored into a new identity. That may be why turmeric leaves such a strong impression on memory. Many spices affect smell or taste more than sight. Turmeric reaches the eyes first. Before a person knows the flavor, the color has already arrived. Before the first bite, the bowl looks warmer. The plate looks richer. The meal seems to carry more light. And once human beings discovered that one underground plant could do all this, it was almost inevitable that turmeric would grow larger in meaning. A color that stains the hand, brightens the cloth, deepens the food, and marks the moment begins to feel like more than pigment. It begins to feel like presence. So turmeric's golden life did not stop in the field, or even in the kitchen. It entered fabric, ceremony, tools, surfaces, and memory, leaving traces wherever it went. And from there, it becomes natural to wonder about the places where a plant like this first found the warmth, rain, and patient ground it needed to grow at all. For a plant so strongly tied to color, turmeric begins in a landscape that is green, wet, and warm. It does not belong to dry wind or sharp frost. It is not a plant of cold mornings and short summers. Turmeric prefers a world where the soil stays soft, where the air holds moisture, and where the growing season stretches long enough for quiet work to happen underground. That kind of growth cannot be rushed. Turmeric thrives best in tropical and subtropical regions, where warmth is not a brief visitor, but a steady condition. The soil needs to stay loose enough for the rhizomes to expand. The plant needs moisture, but not the kind that leaves the ground waterlogged for too long. Rain matters. So does drainage. Too little water and growth slows. too much standing water, and the underground parts can begin to suffer. Like many living things, turmeric does not want extremes. It wants balance. Above the ground, the plant gives a very different impression from the dry spice most people know. It sends up broad, smooth leaves that can make a field of turmeric look almost tropical in the most familiar way, dense, green, and full. The leaves rise from the base in tall clusters, catching light and rain, while below them, the rhizomes slowly thicken in darkness. If someone walked past such a field without knowing what it was, they might not imagine that the source of such a bright kitchen powder was hidden under those calm green leaves. That contrast is one of the most interesting parts of turmeric's life. What the eye sees above ground is softness and leaf. What matters most below ground is density, storage, and pigment. The visible part gathers sunlight. The hidden part gathers substance. Turmeric usually takes many months to mature. In many growing regions, the plant is set into the soil before the rainy season or near the start of warm seasonal growth, then left to develop gradually. During that time, the leaves rise, the stems strengthen, and beneath the surface, the rhizomes branch outward. They do not simply grow larger in one smooth shape. They form hands, fingers, and swollen side pieces, each one thickening little by little. The harvest comes only after patience, and patience is built into nearly every part of turmeric's character. Unlike fast leafy herbs that can be cut again and again through a season, turmeric asks to be left alone for a long stretch. It is more like a storehouse than a quick crop. The plant is not producing something delicate and fleeting at the tips of its stems. It is building something substantial below, layer by layer, as heat, rain, and time pass over it. The field may look quiet, but underground the plant is steadily storing energy, color, and all the compounds that will later be dried, ground, cooked, and studied. The soil itself matters too. Farmers often prefer rich, loose, well-worked ground for turmeric because compacted earth can make it harder for the rhizomes to expand cleanly. The underground body needs space. It needs a place to push outward. In that sense, turmeric is shaped not only by climate, but by the texture of the earth around it. Fine soil can help produce smoother rhizomes. Good drainage can protect them. A long, warm season can deepen their development. Even before harvest, the place where turmeric grows begins shaping what kind of turmeric it will become. That is true of many plants, of course, but it feels especially important here because so much of turmeric's identity is held out of sight. With fruits, flowers, or seeds, change is easy to watch. With turmeric, the most meaningful growth is hidden. Rain falls on the leaves. Heat presses into the field. The days move forward. Yet the real transformation is buried. Only at harvest does the full result become visible. By then, the leaves often begin to fade and dry. The green quiet of the field softens. What rose above the ground has done its work. And below, the rhizomes are ready to be lifted from the soil, washed, sorted, and prepared for the next stage of their life. It is a beautiful kind of cycle when you think about it. A plant that asks for warmth, water, and time spends months building itself in darkness, then emerges into human hands as one of the brightest things in the kitchen. The calm green field gives rise to golden powder. The wet soil gives rise to color. The long season gives rise to something that can stain cloth, brighten food, and remain in human memory for centuries. And once people living in such climates began to know a plant like that well, it was never likely to remain only a crop. It would become something closer to a companion. One more quiet presence woven into daily life over generations. Turmeric has already begun to feel larger than a simple spice. It grows slowly in warm soil. It hides its brightest color underground. It stains what it touches. It moves easily between the kitchen and the world of cloth, surfaces, and hands. And once all of that is seen clearly, its long history begins to feel less surprising. A plant like this was never likely to pass through human life unnoticed. Turmeric has been used in South Asia for roughly 4,000 years. That is an almost difficult length of time to picture. It reaches back beyond modern nations, beyond many written traditions in their present form, beyond most of the familiar markers people use to measure the past. For countless generations, turmeric was already there. It was already being grown, handled, dried, mixed, cooked, and passed along. People did not need to rediscover it every few centuries. They simply continued living with it. That kind of continuity usually happens only when something proves useful in more than one way. If a plant serves a single narrow purpose, it may vanish when tastes change or when another material replaces it. But turmeric did not depend on one role alone. It moved across cooking, healing traditions, dyeing, ceremony, household use, and trade. It could brighten food. It could leave color on fabric and skin. It could be prepared fresh or dried. It could be used in daily meals and in moments people considered more meaningful than ordinary time. A plant with that many uses becomes hard to set aside. Over long stretches of history, this is often how familiarity becomes permanence. Human beings keep close to the plants that solve more than one problem at once. A useful plant feeds. It colors. It stores well. It travels. It becomes part of remedies. It slips into seasonal rituals. It enters the memory of the household. Once that happens, it stops feeling optional. It begins to feel normal, and then older than normal, almost as though it has always been there. Turmeric has that quality. It does not feel like a recent arrival in human life. It feels old in the deeper sense. Settled, repeated, worn smooth by daily use. There is something calming about imagining that long familiarity. In one century, someone cuts fresh turmeric from the earth and mixes it into food. In another, someone dries it, grinds it, and stores it carefully. In another, someone uses it for color, for healing, for marking, for preparation, for routine. The names around it may shift. The vessels change. The roads change. The kitchens change. Yet turmeric remains recognizable. The same golden body returns again and again, generation after generation, in slightly different forms. That is why it helps to think of turmeric less as a trend and more as a companion. Modern life often treats plants this way for only a short while. A certain ingredient becomes popular. People speak about it intensely. It appears everywhere, then fades. Turmeric has lived through far too much time for that kind of shallow attention to define it. Its place was formed slowly, not through novelty, but through repetition. It stayed because people kept finding reasons to keep it near. That is a much deeper kind of importance. And when a plant remains close to human beings for that long, it nearly always gathers more than practical value. It begins to collect meaning. This happens quietly. A bright color that once simply marked cloth begins to suggest blessing, warmth, purity, or life. A familiar ingredient in food begins to carry the comfort of memory. A household material begins to appear at births, weddings, festivals, thresholds, and transitions. Over time, the plant does not change only the things it touches. It changes what people feel when they see it. Long familiarity turns use into recognition, and recognition into symbolism. Turmeric followed that path very naturally. It was never just one thing for long enough to stay only practical. The same qualities that made it useful also made it memorable. Its color was visible. Its stain endured. Its smell and taste were distinct. Its presence repeated. Once a material enters both the body and the imagination, it becomes part of culture in a deeper way. It no longer belongs only to farming or cooking. It begins to belong to a shared sense of what matters. That may be the truest way to understand turmeric's age. Not simply as a number of years, though 4,000 years is remarkable enough, but as a sign of steady human closeness. Turmeric stayed near because it fits so many parts of life at once. It could be held, eaten, mixed, stored, traded, remembered, and seen. It asked little more than warmth, patience, and human attention. In return, it offered color, usefulness, and a kind of continuity that few materials can match. And once a plant has lived alongside people for that long, it becomes almost impossible for it to remain only useful. It begins to take on the deeper meanings that people give to the things they have trusted for centuries. From there, it becomes natural to look more closely at the places where turmeric stopped being just helpful and became culturally meaningful. Once turmeric had lived beside people for long enough, it began to move beyond usefulness alone. It still colored food. It still stained cloth and hands. It still sat in kitchens and storage jars and passed quietly through daily routines. But over time, it also entered moments that people treated with special care. It became part of the visible language of home, blessing, preparation, and transition. That is often how deep familiarity works. A material first proves itself in ordinary life. It is used again and again until no one needs to explain why it is there. Then, slowly, it begins to appear in more meaningful moments too. Not because anyone forces it into those places, but because it already feels trusted. It already feels close. Turmeric became that kind of presence in many parts of Indian life. It was not only something to eat, it was something to keep, to prepare, to touch, to notice, and to associate with care. In the home, turmeric could be part of daily cooking so regular that it almost disappeared into the rhythm of the day. A little spoonful into lentils, a little into vegetables, a little into rice, soups, stews, pickles, or spice blends. The hand learned the amount without measuring too much. The eye learned the color before the dish was even finished. Over years, then generations, that kind of repetition turns a plant into something more than an ingredient. It becomes part of the visual memory of life itself. And because turmeric is so visible, it naturally gathered meaning. Its color helped that happen. Bright yellow and golden tones are difficult to treat as empty. Human beings almost always attach feeling to such colors. They can suggest warmth, light, life, renewal, blessing, health, ripeness, or celebration. A pale powder may season quietly without drawing much thought, but turmeric does not disappear so easily. It announces itself the moment it touches food, water, cloth, or skin. That makes it especially suited to ceremonial life, because ceremonies often depend on visible change. They mark that something important is happening. Turmeric could do that very simply. It could leave a trace. In many traditions, that visible trace became part of domestic and ceremonial practice. Turmeric pastes, powders, and mixtures appeared in preparations for important occasions, especially those involving change from one stage of life to another. A plant that already lived in the kitchen could move naturally into the world of blessing and transition. It did not have to come from some distant sacred source. It was already present in ordinary life, which may have made it all the more fitting. What is trusted daily often feels most powerful when the moment becomes special. That closeness matters. A sacred thing that is also familiar has a different kind of force than something rare and remote. It feels woven into life rather than dropped in from outside it. Turmeric carried that woven quality. It was part of meals, part of routines, part of practical household knowledge. So when it appeared in ceremonies, it did not feel separate from the rest of life. It felt like life itself being gently marked and brightened. Its role in such moments also shows how repetition creates meaning. A single use does not usually create symbolism, but a repeated use, carried through homes and families over centuries, begins to shape how people feel. The same color appears at significant moments again and again. The same plant is prepared with care. The same golden traces return. Over time, the material becomes associated with hope, well-being, blessing, and auspiciousness, not because of one explanation, but because generations have already felt those connections. That is part of what makes turmeric so interesting. It is both ordinary and marked with meaning at the same time. It may sit in a simple kitchen jar and still carry associations far beyond the meal. It may be handled casually one day and ceremonially the next. It belongs to the everyday world, yet it also helps define moments that feel set apart from it. There is something very human in that. People do not always choose grand materials for their most meaningful rituals. Often, they choose the things that have stayed near them for a long time. The things already woven into daily life. The things whose color, scent, and texture already feel known. Turmeric became one of those things. Through long repetition, it entered both the ordinary and the sacred, until the line between them softened. And once a plant becomes meaningful in one region in such a deep and settled way, it rarely remains there alone. Things that hold both practical value and cultural meaning tend to travel, moving outward with merchants, travelers, families, and food, until they begin new lives in other places too. Once turmeric had settled so deeply into daily life, it was almost certain to travel. Plants that matter in many ways rarely stay in one place forever. If they flavor food, if they color cloth, if they store well after drying, and if people already trust them, they begin to move outward with human beings. They go where merchants go. They go where families go. They go where memory goes. Turmeric followed those old human paths. In its fresh form, turmeric is heavy with moisture and tied closely to the place where it grows. But once it is boiled, dried and ground, it becomes much easier to carry. The bright rhizome turns into a powder that stores well, travels more easily, and can survive long journeys better than many fresh plants ever could. That simple change helped give turmeric a larger life. It could leave the warm fields where it was grown and enter the wider movement of trade. This is one of the great quiet powers of spices. They are small, but they travel far. Across history, valuable plant materials moved through trade routes, not only because they made food taste better, but because they brought other qualities too. Some offered preservation, some offered fragrance, some offered color. Some carried prestige because they came from far away. Some carried meaning from the cultures that used them first. Turmeric had several of these qualities at once. It brought color, warmth, usefulness, and a sense of distinctive identity. A spice like that does not need to force its way into the world. It is invited. Merchants and travelers have always carried more than goods. They carry habits, recipes, preferences, and small pieces of home. A spice packed for trade may begin as an item of exchange, but once it reaches a new region, it becomes part of conversation, cooking, curiosity, and adaptation. Someone opens a container and sees the color. Someone else tastes it in a dish. Someone notices what it does to rice or broth or cloth. From there, the plant begins another stage of its life. Turmeric moved outward through South Asia and into other parts of Asia, and over time it became known much farther beyond its earliest home regions. It entered food cultures in different ways, depending on what people around it already valued. In some places, its color mattered most. In others, its warmth and earthy bitterness mattered more. In some kitchens, it was folded into complex spice mixtures. In others, it appeared more simply, as one note among fewer ingredients. The plant stayed recognizably itself, but its role changed with each new setting. That is often what happens when a useful plant travels. It does not arrive as a fixed idea. It arrives as a possibility. Turmeric's movement also reminds us that trade is not only about luxury. Some spices certainly became markers of wealth and distance, but many also stayed close to everyday life because they were practical. Turmeric could be used in large family cooking. It could be kept dry and ready. It could change the look of food with a small amount. It could become part of ordinary meals, rather than existing only as a rare indulgence. That gave it a different kind of staying power. It was not only admired, it was used. Over time, that use reshaped distant kitchens quietly. A pot that might once have looked pale became golden. A spice blend gained a new base note. A preserved food took on deeper color. A cooking tradition absorbed one more thread. This is how plant materials change the world most often, not all at once, but through repetition. A little added here, then there. A new habit forms. Then the habit feels old. Then no one remembers the moment before it arrived. Turmeric belongs to that category of historical travelers. It did not need to be dramatic to be influential. It worked through daily life, through market stalls, storage jars, wrapped bundles, family recipes, and long routes of exchange. Its color made it noticeable. Its usefulness made it worth carrying. Its adaptability helped it survive in new cultural settings. And still, even as it traveled, turmeric did not remain perfectly the same in meaning. A plant may begin in one region with certain associations and then take on different lives elsewhere. In one place, it may remain close to ceremony. In another, it may become mainly culinary. In one kitchen, it may be central. In another, it may stay at the edges. That is part of what makes traveling plants so interesting. They move outward, but they do not stay unchanged. Turmeric spread because it carried more than flavor alone. It carried color, practicality, memory, and the quiet authority of something long trusted. But once it arrived in new places, it entered new combinations, new dishes, and new habits. And in those places, people began using it in ways shaped not only by the plant itself, but by the kitchens that received it. Because when a spice travels far enough, it does not simply arrive. It begins to change, and to be changed in return. Once turmeric entered new kitchens, it began doing what the most adaptable ingredients always do. It settled into different dishes without losing its identity. It did not need to become the main flavor every time. Often, it worked more quietly than that. A little in the pot, a little in the oil, a little in the broth, and the whole dish changed. That change could happen in many forms. In some places, turmeric moved into curries, where it became part of a wider conversation among spices. It might sit beside cumin, coriander, chili, ginger, garlic, or mustard seed, adding its earthiness and color without demanding to stand alone. In rice dishes, even a small amount could turn the whole pot golden. In soups and stews, it could deepen the look of the liquid and give it a warmer, fuller presence. In pickles, it added both brightness and an earthy bitterness that helped balance salt, sourness, and oil. Turmeric rarely lives by itself for long. That is one of the most important things to understand about it in food. Some ingredients are built to stand alone and be recognized immediately. Turmeric is usually not that kind of ingredient. It works best inside a group. It sits among other flavors and helps shape the whole. That does not mean it disappears. It means it behaves more like structure than spotlight. A dish with turmeric often feels different before a person can fully explain why. The color looks richer, the smell feels warmer, the flavor seems more grounded. Turmeric has entered the food and quietly changed its center. In some kitchens, that change is mainly visual. The spice is used first for the golden tone it gives to rice, lentils, vegetables, or sauces. In others, the flavor matters just as much. Turmeric brings a certain dryness, a faint bitterness, and a warm, earthy depth that can make food feel more serious, more settled, more complete. It does not usually taste bright or sharp. It tastes grounded. It tastes as though it came from the soil and still remembers it. That grounding quality is one reason turmeric works so well in cooked food. Hot oil softens it. Moisture carries it. Time blends it into the dish. A spice like turmeric often needs companionship to fully open. Salt helps. Fat helps. Other aromatics help. Heat helps. When given those things, it becomes less like a powder sitting on the surface and more like a part of the whole body of the meal. Fresh turmeric and dried turmeric also lead food in slightly different directions. Fresh turmeric has more brightness to it, a little more sharpness, a little more living bite. It can feel closer to ginger in texture, though not in flavor. When cut or grated, it releases moisture and scent at once, and its color looks almost vivid enough to glow. Fresh turmeric can bring a cleaner, more immediate quality to a dish, especially when used in pastes, teas, broths, or fresh cooking preparations. Dried turmeric powder feels more settled. It has traveled farther from the field and closer to the shelf, the spoon, the pot. Its flavor is more familiar to most people because this is the form that spread most easily across the world. Powdered turmeric blends quickly into spice mixtures and simmering dishes. It is easier to measure, easier to store, and easier to repeat. In many ways, the powder is what allowed turmeric to become global. But even in that dry form, it still carries the memory of the fresh rhizome underground, the moisture gone, the color remaining. What makes turmeric especially interesting in food is how little it often takes. A large pot of rice does not need much. A stew can be changed by a small spoonful. A broth can shift from pale to golden almost at once. This is part of its quiet strength. Turmeric does not usually transform food through volume. It transforms through concentration. A small amount can change appearance first, then mood, then taste. And once that begins to happen across many dishes, the plant becomes part of a whole culinary atmosphere. It is no longer tied to one recipe alone. It appears in combinations, in habits, in cooking instincts passed along without much explanation. Someone reaches for it almost automatically. The dish feels unfinished without that touch of warmth and gold. That is how turmeric changed food in so many places. Not by replacing everything around it, but by joining what was already there and altering the whole. It entered curries, rice, soups, stews, pickles, and spice blends because it knew how to live inside combinations. It could color, it could balance, it could deepen, it could stay in the background and still leave a mark. And after seeing how it changes so many dishes, it becomes natural to ask a simpler question. If turmeric can do all this inside a meal, what does it really taste and smell like on its own? By the time turmeric reaches the plate, many people have already noticed its color before they have truly noticed its flavor. The yellow arrives first. The golden broth, the bright rice, the warm-looking stew, all of that reaches the eye before the tongue has its turn. But turmeric does have a taste of its own, and when it is given a little space, that taste becomes easier to understand. On its own, turmeric is earthy. That is usually the first and truest word for it. It carries something dry, grounded, and root-like, as though the soil still lingers quietly inside it. There is warmth too, but not the kind of warmth that flashes sharply like chili or rises sweetly like cinnamon. It is steadier than that, lower, more settled. Turmeric tastes like something that grew below the surface and held its character there for a long time. It is also slightly bitter. That bitterness matters, because it is one reason turmeric can feel so balanced in cooked food when used well, and so unpleasant when used too heavily. A small amount gives depth. Too much can make a dish feel dusty, dry, or strangely flat. Turmeric does not usually improve by simply adding more of it. It works better when it is folded into other things, supported by oil, salt, aromatics, and thyme. That is one of the quiet truths of cooking with turmeric. It is not a spice that usually shines by force. It shines by placement. A little hot oil helps open it. Salt gives it shape. Onion, garlic, ginger, cumin, coriander, pepper, and other spices can round its edges and carry it into the dish more smoothly. Moisture helps too. In broth or stew, turmeric softens into the liquid. In rice, it spreads gently through the grains. In lentils, it settles into the body of the pot. It wants to be blended, not left sitting alone on the surface. There is even a faint peppery quality to turmeric, though it is much softer than black pepper. Some people also notice a slight musky or almost mustard-like note, especially in fresh turmeric. These smaller qualities are easy to miss when turmeric is part of a spice mixture, but they help explain why it tastes more complete in some dishes than in others. It is not just yellow powder. It carries a layered flavor, even if the layers are subtle. Fresh turmeric and powdered turmeric also speak a little differently. Fresh turmeric feels more alive in the mouth and in the air around it. When cut or grated, it gives off a sharper scent and a more immediate taste. There is often a slight brightness in it, along with the earthiness. A bit more movement, a bit more edge. It can seem closer to ginger in energy, even though the flavor itself is quite different. Fresh turmeric often feels cleaner and more vivid, as though the plant has only just left the ground. Powdered turmeric is softer and more familiar. Drying changes the experience. It becomes easier to blend, easier to store, and easier to use in everyday cooking. The flavor feels rounder, quieter, more settled into itself. This is the form most people know, and because it is so often used in combination with other ingredients, many people recognize turmeric best as part of a larger flavor, rather than as something fully separate. That may be why it is sometimes hard to describe. Turmeric is often remembered through effect, rather than through isolation. It makes a dish feel warmer. It gives food a deeper, earthier center. It helps create the sense that something has been grounded and brought together. The color may be what first catches attention, but the flavor helps explain why turmeric remained in so many kitchens once it arrived there. Still, its success depends on restraint. Too much turmeric can make food taste harsh, chalky, or oddly empty, especially if there is not enough fat or moisture to carry it. It is one of those ingredients that teaches balance very quickly. A little can bring harmony. Too much can dull the whole dish. That is why experienced cooks often reach for turmeric with a calm hand. They know it is strong, but not in a loud way. Strong in the way roots are strong. Quietly concentrated. So the flavor behind the color is not dramatic, but it is real. Earthy, warm, slightly bitter, faintly peppery, and most comfortable when held inside a fuller company of ingredients. Turmeric rarely asks to be the whole story. It asks to help shape the story around it. And even then, for all its flavor, the eye may still be the first place where turmeric does its work. Before the body fully knows the taste, it has already seen the gold and begun to expect something warm, rich, and full before the first bite has even begun. Before a meal is tasted, it is already being judged by the eyes. This happens so quickly that most people barely notice it. A bowl is placed on the table. Steam rises. Light catches the surface. The color of the food reaches the brain before smell fully settles in, and long before the first bite is taken. By the time the spoon is lifted, expectation has already begun. Turmeric is especially good at this kind of early influence because its color is so strong. Even a small amount can turn a dish golden, and that golden tone changes the feeling of the food at once. Pale rice becomes richer looking. A simple broth seems warmer. Lentils look deeper, fuller, more settled. The body has not yet tasted anything, but the mind is already preparing for a certain kind of experience. That is one of the quiet powers of color in food. It helps shape anticipation. Human beings are highly visual eaters. We often speak as though flavor begins on the tongue, but much of the experience starts earlier than that. The eyes look for clues. Is the food fresh or dull, warm or cold, light or heavy, simple or rich? Color helps answer those questions in an instant, even when the answers are not fully accurate. We do not only eat with the mouth, we begin eating with expectation. Bright yellow and gold seem especially good at creating this effect. Those colors are often linked, whether consciously or not, with warmth, sunlight, ripeness, richness, and comfort. A golden dish can look nourishing before its ingredients are even known. It can seem fuller and more welcoming than the same dish would seem in a pale shade. This does not mean the eyes are being fooled exactly. It means the eyes are doing what they have always done, reading visible signs and building a first impression from them. Turmeric makes that process easy. Its color spreads through food so visibly that it changes not only the look of a dish, but its mood. A pot of rice touched with turmeric does not just become yellow. It begins to feel warmer. A spoonful of soup does not just darken slightly. It begins to feel more substantial. Even a cutting board dusted with turmeric or fingertips, left faintly stained by the powder, carry a sense that something vivid and earthy has passed through. The color seems to suggest depth before the tongue confirms anything. There is a practical side to this too. In nature, bright colors often signal important information. They can suggest ripeness, energy, sweetness, danger, or freshness. Human beings evolved in a world where visible signs mattered. So it is not surprising that color still affects appetite and expectations so strongly. A food that looks dull may feel less inviting. A food that glows with warm color may seem more worth reaching for. Turmeric steps directly into that ancient visual language, and yet its effect is not loud. It does not make food look artificial when used gently. It makes food look alive. That may be why turmeric became so successful in everyday cooking. It could transform appearance without requiring much quantity. A small amount in a pan with onions and oil can begin changing a whole dish almost at once. A broth that was plain becomes golden. A stew looks deeper. A pile of rice seems brighter and more complete. In that sense, turmeric does part of its work before flavor is even discussed. It prepares the dish to be received. This is also why bowls of rice, warm broths, and stained cutting boards matter so much in understanding turmeric. The science of perception is not abstract here. It lives in ordinary scenes. A spoon passing through yellow soup, grains of rice taking on a golden cast, a wooden board holding the faint trace of pigment after a root has been sliced. These are small moments, but they show how visual experience becomes part of eating itself. By the first bite, the body is already leaning toward a conclusion. The food seems warm, it seems grounded, it seems full. Sometimes color helps create that expectation so smoothly that the person eating never stops to think about why. Turmeric is a perfect bridge between those visible expectations and the quieter chemistry inside the plant. Its color reaches the eyes first, but the curiosity it creates does not stop there. Once people begin to notice how strongly turmeric changes the way food looks and feels, it becomes easier to understand why scientists eventually became interested in the compounds hidden inside that same bright golden spice too. By now, turmeric's color has done much of the early work for us. It has already shown itself in the field, in the kitchen, and in the way it changes whatever it touches. A pale dish becomes golden. A fresh-cut rhizome seems almost to glow from within. Fingers and wooden spoons hold the trace of it. The color is so central to turmeric that it becomes the natural place to begin when the science enters the story. That bright yellow-orange pigment is tied closely to a compound called curcumin. Curcumin is the best-known compound inside turmeric, and for many people, it has become almost another name for the plant itself. But turmeric is not only curcumin. Turmeric is a whole rhizome, a whole spice, a whole plant, carrying many compounds at once. Curcumin simply became the most famous because it is linked so clearly to the color people notice first. When the inside of the rhizome flashes gold, curcumin is part of the reason why. It belongs to a family of compounds called curcuminoids. That name sounds technical, but the basic idea is simple. Plants often contain groups of natural substances that help create color, scent, taste, and other qualities. Curcuminoids are part of turmeric's inner chemistry. They help give the rhizome its visual identity, and they are also part of the reason scientists began to pay closer attention to it. That is one of the gentlest ways science often begins. Not with something invisible, but with something obvious. A plant leaves a strong stain. A plant has a color that seems unusually rich. A plant stays in human use for thousands of years. People begin to wonder why. Then, much later, instruments and laboratories try to look more closely at what generations of hands and eyes had already noticed in a simpler way. Turmeric is a good example of that. Long before anyone spoke about curcumin in chemical terms, people already knew this plant carried something distinctive inside it. Still, it matters to remember that curcumin is only one part of the story. Turmeric contains oils and other natural compounds as well, each contributing something to the whole. Some shape aroma, some shape flavor. Some may affect how the plant behaves in the body or in food. This is true of many plants. The more closely they are studied, the less they seem to be a single thing. What first appears to be one flavor or one color turns out to be a small internal world of different substances working together. Turmeric has that kind of quiet complexity. Curcumin became the most famous part, but not the only part. And yet, it is easy to see why curcumin drew so much attention. Color is visible chemistry. That may be the most calming way to think about it. The gold inside turmeric is not decoration placed on top of the rhizome. It is the outward sign of the plant's inner structure. When the cut surface glows yellow-orange, the chemistry is already being seen before it is named. The same compound that later appears in scientific papers is already there in the kitchen, already there in the field, already there on the knife and the fingertips. That visible quality gives turmeric science a different feeling from many other plant stories. Often, chemistry seems hidden and abstract, something that belongs far away in glass containers and clean rooms. But with turmeric, the first clue sits plainly in the color itself. The science begins in sight. A bright rhizome is cut open, and the mystery is already present. Perhaps that is why modern curiosity around turmeric grew so steadily. It was not only an old spice, it was an old spice with a visible signal that something interesting was happening inside it. The long history made people pay attention. The color made the questions easier to ask. Why is it so bright? Why does it stain so deeply? Why has it remained so important for so long? Once those questions are asked, chemistry naturally follows, and that is where turmeric begins to enter a new phase of its life. For most of its history, it was known through fields, kitchens, homes, and traditions. But once researchers began naming and studying the compounds inside it, turmeric started moving into laboratories as well, carrying its golden color into a very different kind of world. Once turmeric entered the laboratory, it did not arrive as a stranger. Scientists were not looking at an unknown plant that had appeared suddenly out of nowhere. They were looking at something people had already lived with for centuries upon centuries. It had a long history in cooking. It had a place in traditional healing systems. It had been used on the skin, in mixtures, in food, in ritual, and in ordinary daily life. That long familiarity did not prove anything by itself, but it did make turmeric hard to ignore. This is often how scientific attention begins with old plants. A material remains in human life for so long, and in so many different settings, that eventually people begin asking more careful questions. What exactly is inside it? Which parts of its reputation come from repeated human observation? Which parts can be measured? Which parts may have been overstated? And which parts might lead to something worth studying more deeply? Turmeric invited those questions very naturally. Part of the reason was its color, which had already pointed researchers toward compounds like curcumin. But part of the reason was also its long connection to the body. People had not used turmeric only to color rice or stew. They had also placed it close to ideas of comfort, balance, healing, and bodily care. Again, that did not automatically mean every traditional use would stand up under modern testing. But it did mean there was already a long trail of human attention leading scientists toward the plant. Modern research became especially interested in turmeric in relation to inflammation, oxidation, and broader questions about how plant compounds interact with the body. Those words can sound technical at first, but the basic ideas are gentle enough. Inflammation is part of how the body responds to stress, injury, or disturbance. Oxidation has to do with certain chemical processes that happen naturally in living systems over time. Researchers often study plant compounds to see how they behave around those processes, especially when a plant has been used for generations in ways that suggest people felt it had noticeable effects. Turmeric entered that area of study because it seemed to sit at an interesting meeting point. It was ancient but still present, familiar but still chemically distinctive, ordinary in the kitchen, yet repeatedly discussed in connection with wellness and bodily care. That combination made it appealing to modern science. It was not only historically important, it also seemed to offer questions that could be tested. Still, the calmest way to understand this is not as a story of instant proof, but as a story of curiosity. Scientific research often begins with old observation, but it does not exist to flatter old observation. It exists to examine it. Sometimes that examination supports long-held ideas. Sometimes it narrows them. Sometimes it complicates them. And sometimes it finds that a plant is more modest than tradition claimed, or more interesting in one area than in another. Turmeric became part of that process. The laboratory did not simply receive the old story and approve it. The laboratory began asking how much of that story could be measured, how much depended on preparation, and how much still remained uncertain. That is why turmeric feels like such a clear meeting point between history and testing. On one side is inherited use, repeated through families, kitchens, and healing traditions over a very long time. On the other side is the modern habit of isolating compounds, comparing results, measuring effects, and trying to separate confidence from assumption. Turmeric sits quietly between those worlds. It carries the weight of old trust, but it also invites new scrutiny. There is something almost peaceful about that balance. A plant can be respected without being exaggerated. It can be studied without losing its older human story. It can remain a kitchen spice while also becoming an object of research. Turmeric did not need to stop being ordinary in order to become scientifically interesting. In some ways, its ordinariness was part of what made the questions feel so worthwhile. If something this familiar had been kept close for so long, perhaps there was a reason. And if there was a reason, perhaps it could be described more clearly. But asking careful questions also means accepting careful answers. The more turmeric was studied, the more important it became to separate the plant itself from the claims gathering around it. That leads to a quieter and more precise question, one that matters whenever an old plant enters modern science. What does the evidence actually suggest, and where does uncertainty still remain? When a plant has been used for a very long time, people often begin speaking about it in broad and confident ways. That is understandable. Familiar things invite certainty. A spice that has lived in kitchens, homes, and healing traditions for thousands of years can start to seem almost beyond question. But calm understanding usually asks for something softer than certainty. It asks for distinction. It asks us to look closely enough to notice that turmeric is not always the same thing in every form, and that old use and modern proof do not always line up in simple ways. One of the most important distinctions is this: turmeric as a food is not the same as curcumin as an isolated compound. That difference matters more than it may seem at first. In food, turmeric arrives as part of a whole rhizome or spice powder. It comes with many compounds at once. It comes with fiber, oils, pigments, aroma, and the wider context of a meal. It may be cooked in fat, mixed with other spices, and eaten in small repeated amounts as part of daily life. Curcumin, by contrast, is often discussed as one extracted part of turmeric, studied in more concentrated or controlled forms. Those are not identical situations, even if they begin with the same plant. This is one reason the evidence around turmeric can feel uneven. Strength varies. Preparation varies. Dose varies. A pinch of turmeric in lentils is not the same as a capsule built around a concentrated extract. Fresh turmeric grated into broth is not the same as powdered turmeric cooked in oil. One product may contain more curcuminoids than another. One may be combined with other ingredients. One may be absorbed differently. Once all of those differences enter the picture, simple claims become harder to trust. And that is where careful thinking becomes important. Research on turmeric and curcumin has produced interest in many areas. But the strength of the evidence is not the same everywhere. In some questions, findings are suggestive. In others, they are mixed. In others still, the effect may be modest, difficult to separate, or dependent on conditions that are not always easy to repeat. This does not mean turmeric is uninteresting. It means real science is often slower and more uneven than popular language makes it sound. Popular health language likes clear promises. It likes bold phrases, simple headlines, and the feeling that one familiar substance can explain many things at once. Turmeric has often been pulled into that kind of language because its history is long, its color is vivid, and its chemistry is real enough to sound impressive even in short form. But when a plant becomes widely talked about, its reputation can begin to move faster than the evidence itself. That does not take away from turmeric's place in human life. It only reminds us to keep the right scale in view. As an ordinary food, turmeric has long belonged to daily cooking, an inherited practice. That is one kind of truth. Medical claims are another matter. Once people begin speaking about treatment, prevention, or broad health effects, the questions become more demanding. Evidence must be stronger. Definitions must be clearer. A long culinary life does not automatically become a medical conclusion. A traditional use does not automatically become a proven modern outcome. These are different forms of knowledge, and they do not always move at the same speed. There is something restful about accepting that without turning it into disappointment. Not every meaningful thing in human life needs to be dramatic. A plant can remain valuable even if the evidence around certain claims is still incomplete. A spice can still matter deeply in food, memory, and tradition without needing to become a miracle. In fact, turmeric seems easier to understand once that pressure is removed. It becomes what it has always been first, an old and useful plant, full of color, familiarity, and enough complexity to deserve both respect and caution. So the calmest answer is often the most honest one. Turmeric may do some things. It may help in certain contexts more than others. It may be more interesting in some forms than in others. But the picture is not simple, and certainty should not run ahead of evidence. Part of that uncertainty comes from a very practical issue. Even when curcumin is present, the body does not take it in very easily on its own. And that quiet difficulty helps explain why turmeric so often appears beside another familiar kitchen ingredient. one that has been waiting in the background of this story from the very beginning. You may have noticed black pepper has hovered near turmeric several times, almost like a quiet companion waiting at the edge of the story. It appeared early as a familiar pairing people often hear about, even if they do not always know why. And after the careful uncertainty of recent questions, it now returns in a more specific way. Not as a trend and not as a trick, but as a useful example of how plant chemistry can shape what the body is actually able to do with what it receives. The key idea here is bioavailability. That word sounds technical, but the meaning is simple. Bioavailability is about how much of a substance the body can absorb and use after it has been eaten. Something can be present in food or in a supplement, but that does not automatically mean the body takes in very much of it. The substance still has to move through digestion, cross into the bloodstream, and remain available in a useful form long enough for the body to do anything with it. Curcumin, for all the attention it receives, is known for limited bioavailability on its own. In plain terms, that means the body does not absorb it especially well by itself. Some of it may pass through without much effect. Some may be changed quickly into other forms. Some may never remain available in the way people imagine when they hear large claims attached to turmeric. This is one reason the science around curcumin has always been more complicated than the early excitement sometimes made it sound. And this is where black pepper enters more clearly. Black pepper contains a compound called piperine. Piperine is one of the main substances that gives black pepper its familiar bite. But it has also drawn attention because it can affect how the body handles other compounds. In the case of curcumin, piperine is often discussed because it can increase absorption. That does not mean black pepper turns turmeric into something magical. It simply means that one common kitchen ingredient helps explain why the pairing became so widely talked about. There is something satisfying about that. Two spices meeting in a pan, and the story between them is not only about taste, it is also about movement, transformation, and access inside the body. The old kitchen pairing turns out to contain a quiet biochemical interest of its own. That said, the simplest version of the story is still the best one. Curcumin on its own tends to be absorbed poorly. Piperine from black pepper can help increase how much of it the body takes in. That is why the pairing appears again and again in articles, recipes, capsules, and conversations. A practical problem helped create a practical companion. It is also worth noticing that this explanation remains grounded in food, not only in laboratories. Spices do not meet only in research papers. They meet in oil, in steam, in soups, in rice, in lentils, in sauces, and in warm bowls carried to the table. Black pepper and turmeric have likely shared pots long before anyone could explain the chemistry between them. Their partnership existed first as part of cooking. The later science simply gave one part of that partnership a name. That does not mean every dish using both spices is secretly designed around bioavailability, of course. Sometimes cooks pair ingredients because they taste good together, because they belong to the same culinary language, or because tradition already placed them side by side generations ago. But once the chemistry became clearer, the pairing gained another layer of meaning. A familiar taste combination became a small lesson in how the body does not simply receive compounds directly, but filters and handles them through many steps. In that sense, black pepper helps make turmeric's story feel more complete. It reminds us that what matters in food is not always obvious from the ingredient list alone. Two spices can sit quietly next to each other on a shelf and still influence each other once they enter heat, oil, and the body. The visible yellow of turmeric may catch the eye first, but the sharper dark grain of pepper carries its own hidden role. There is a nice balance in that image. One spice brings color, the other brings bite. One draws attention through brightness. The other works through a quieter kind of chemical assistance. Together, they form a partnership that is both ancient and newly explained. And once those compounds move beyond the pan and into the body, they enter a much slower and more hidden process. Food becomes digestion. Plant matter becomes breakdown, movement, filtering, and change. What seems so simple in the bowl begins another life inside us, where warmth, fat, enzymes, and time all help decide what remains, what alters, and what quietly passes through. Once turmeric leaves the spoon and enters the body, its story becomes quieter and less visible. In the bowl, everything still feels easy to picture. There is the golden broth, the rice, the warm oil carrying spice through the dish, the black pepper scattered across the surface. But after that first swallow, the food begins to change. It does not remain what it was on the plate. Digestion is a kind of transformation, slow and hidden, where meals are broken down, sorted, altered, and moved into forms the body can actually use. That matters for turmeric because what enters the mouth is not exactly what travels onward. A warm curry, a cup of turmeric tea, a spoonful of golden milk, or a pot of lentils seasoned with spice may all contain turmeric, but the body does not receive each one in the same way. The plant compounds inside the food meet stomach acid, digestive enzymes, bile, and the long unfolding work of the intestines. Fats may help carry certain compounds. Other foods in the meal may affect how quickly things move. Heat and cooking may have already changed the spice before it was even eaten. By the time turmeric has passed through all of that, it has become part of a much more complicated process than the simple act of seasoning a dish. This is true of food in general, but turmeric makes it especially easy to notice. The powder in the jar looks stable and finished. It seems like a final form. Yet inside the body, it is only the beginning of another series of changes. Some of the compounds are released from the food more easily than others. Some are altered into new forms. Some pass through with only limited absorption. Some may depend on being eaten with fat or alongside other ingredients to move more effectively into the bloodstream. The meal is not simply entering the body whole. It is being translated. That is a calmer way to think about digestion. Not as a harsh mechanical event, but as translation. The body takes what arrives and begins turning it into something it can work with. Turmeric behaves differently depending on context. Stirred into hot oil, it may already be more ready to spread through food than it would be if taken dry and alone. Mixed into milk or broth, it travels in a different setting. Eaten as part of a full meal, it moves through digestion with proteins, starches, fibers, liquids, and fats surrounding it. All of this affects what the body actually encounters. A bright spoonful of spice may look simple, but once swallowed, it enters a moving world of breakdown and exchange. This is one reason food can never be reduced entirely to labels or to single compounds. A plant is shaped by preparation. So is the body's experience of it. Even the visual forms of turmeric hint at this. Tea carries it lightly. Oil carries it warmly. Milk softens it. Broth spreads it. A dry powder on a spoon feels sharp and concentrated, but in cooked food, it becomes woven into a larger texture. The body receives those forms differently. What matters is not only what turmeric is, but how it arrives. And then there is time. Digestion does not happen all at once. The body works in stages. Food is softened, broken apart, mixed, filtered, absorbed, changed, and carried onward gradually. Some parts are useful. Some are altered before they ever circulate. Some are set aside and passed out again. The golden color that seems so vivid in the bowl may fade from sight very quickly, but its compounds continue into a hidden journey that lasts far longer than the meal itself. There is something strangely comforting about that. The visible world of food gives way to an invisible world of process. Warm spices disappear from sight, but not from activity. The body keeps working quietly, deciding what to keep, what to change, and what to release. Turmeric becomes part of that quiet internal labor, no longer a color on the plate, but a plant meeting the body on the body's own terms. And yet, even before anyone knew the language of compounds, absorption, or transformation, people already sensed that turmeric belonged close to the body. They used it not only in food, but in practices that treated warmth, color, and physical effect as connected. Long before modern chemistry tried to map what happened after eating, older systems had already placed turmeric near ideas of balance, care, and bodily life, giving it roles that reached far beyond the kitchen alone. Long before turmeric entered laboratories, capsules, and modern health language, it already lived close to the body in older healing traditions. People did not always separate food, color, warmth, and bodily care as sharply as modern culture often does. A plant could be part of a meal in one moment and part of a household remedy in another. It could sit in the kitchen and still belong to a larger understanding of comfort, balance, and daily well-being. Turmeric fit naturally into that kind of world. In Ayurveda, one of the oldest traditional systems of healing, turmeric became part of a broad way of thinking about the body, food, and environment. Plants were not understood only through isolated compounds or controlled measurements. They were understood through long observation, inherited knowledge, repetition, and the slow gathering of experience across generations. A plant was watched. It was prepared in different ways. It was combined with other ingredients. It was used at different times, for different conditions, and in different forms. Over time, people formed a picture of what that plant seemed to do. Turmeric earned a place in that picture because it was so adaptable. It could be used internally, mixed into food, milk, teas, broths, or pastes. It could also be used externally, applied to the skin in mixtures or prepared into forms meant for direct contact with the body. That dual life mattered. A plant that could be both eaten and applied was not confined to one kind of usefulness. It moved between inside and outside, between nourishment and treatment, between daily routine and more focused care. This is something older healing traditions often did especially well. They worked with combinations. Rather than isolating a single substance and asking it to act alone, they often brought plants together in ways shaped by inherited practice. Turmeric might appear beside ginger, black pepper, milk, honey, oils, or other herbs and spices. These combinations were not random. They reflected a long habit of noticing that plants behave differently when prepared differently, and that the body receives them differently too. Even without modern biochemical language, people already understood that context mattered. That understanding also tied turmeric to qualities people could feel directly. Its color suggested vitality. Its warmth suggested movement and comfort. Its presence in food made it familiar, while its place in bodily care made it more than ordinary. In many traditional systems, those things were not separate categories. Visible color, sensory warmth, and bodily effect belonged to the same larger pattern. A plant did not need to be only nourishing or only medicinal. It could be both, depending on how it was used. There is something deeply human in that older way of seeing. It trusts repeated experience. It notices patterns slowly. It allows meaning to gather through use, rather than forcing everything into one narrow definition. Turmeric became important, partly because it was observed over such a long period of time. People saw what happened when it was cooked, when it was mixed, when it was applied, when it was taken regularly, and when it was combined with other substances. That long familiarity built confidence, even if the language used to describe that confidence was very different from modern scientific terms. Of course, that does not mean every traditional use can be lifted directly into modern certainty. The point is gentler than that. These older systems remind us that turmeric was never just a spice sitting passively on a shelf. It was part of a lived world where food, body, household care, and inherited knowledge flowed into one another. A yellow rhizome from the soil became something carried into soups, remedies, oils, and rituals of care. It stayed close to the hand because it stayed close to the body. That continuity is important. When modern people hear about turmeric today, it can sound as though it suddenly became interesting only once researchers began measuring it. But in truth, turmeric had already spent centuries being taken seriously in practical, embodied ways. Not always with controlled evidence in the modern sense, but with the kind of attention that comes from long daily use and repeated trust. And the more roles turmeric took on across those worlds, the harder it became to classify it as only one kind of thing. It was food, color, comfort, household material, healing ingredient, and cultural symbol all at once. The longer one stays with turmeric, the less it behaves like a simple spice, and the more it begins to look like one of those old human companions that quietly slipped into every part of life. Turmeric has appeared in many forms. It has grown in warm soil beneath broad green leaves. It has colored food and cloth. It has traveled through trade, entered kitchens far from its earliest home, and remained close to the body in both daily cooking and older healing traditions. The longer one stays with turmeric, the harder it becomes to place it in only one category. It does not stay still long enough for that. It slips from one role to another with surprising ease. It is a spice, yes, but it is also a pigment, a household ingredient, a trade item, a ritual substance, a practical root, a symbol. That is a rare thing for one plant to become. Many plants are useful in one strong way. Some are mainly food. Some are mainly medicine. Some are valued for fiber, fragrance, or color. But turmeric kept crossing those boundaries again and again. It entered cooking because of its flavor and warmth. It entered dyeing because of its vivid golden pigment. It entered homes because it stored well and was easy to keep close at hand. It entered trade because it was portable, valuable, and adaptable. It entered ceremony because color, repetition, and trust gave it meaning. And because it did all of those things, it endured. That may be one of the clearest lessons turmeric offers. The plants that remain closest to human life across centuries are often the ones that can do more than one job. They meet practical needs first, and then slowly gather layers of memory and meaning around those needs. A plant that only fascinates people briefly may disappear once fashions change. A plant that cooks, stains, stores, travels, and comforts becomes much harder to lose. It stays because too many parts of life are already connected to it. Turmeric carries that kind of durable usefulness. Its physical qualities help make that possible. The bright yellow-orange color was impossible to ignore. The earthy scent and warm bitterness gave it a place in food. Its ability to stain gave it presence far beyond taste alone. Its rhizome form made it possible to harvest, dry, store, and move. Nothing about turmeric was merely decorative. Even its beauty had practical force. That may be why it gathered symbolic meaning so naturally. Human beings often turn vivid physical properties into signs. Brightness becomes blessing. Warmth becomes comfort. Color becomes memory. Repetition becomes trust. Turmeric's golden tone invited that process from the very beginning. A plant does not become symbolic by being abstract. It becomes symbolic by being seen over and over again in the same meaningful places. In bowls, in hands, in cloth, in preparations, in transitions, in family memory. Once that repetition settles deeply enough, the plant begins to stand for more than itself. The color no longer feels like color alone. It begins to suggest something larger, something that links the visible world to what people hope for, remember, or value. That is why turmeric feels older than its powder form suggests. A spoonful in a jar can look simple, but it carries all these older identities within it. It carries the field, the rhizome, the dye, the trade route, the kitchen, the household, the body, and the ceremony all at once. It is one of those rare materials that seems to have touched almost every layer of ordinary life without ever becoming distant or grand. There is something deeply calming in that kind of accumulation. Not because it is dramatic, but because it is steady. Turmeric did not become culturally durable by demanding attention all at once. It became durable by proving itself again and again. Useful at the stove, useful in the home, useful in preparation, useful in meaning. The most adaptable plants are often the ones that remain nearest to people the longest, because they fit into life from many directions at once. And turmeric still does that now. It sits in the kitchen as it always has, while also appearing in modern conversations about wellness, tradition, history, and science. It can still be bought fresh with soil clinging to its skin, or dried into a powder that travels the world. It can still seem ordinary in the moment and ancient in the wider view. That is part of its quiet strength. It has never needed to become only one thing. After taking in that broad and layered view, it feels right to return to the simpler labor beneath it all, to the fields, the waiting, and the work of lifting turmeric from the earth and preparing it by hand, step by step, for the lives it will go on to lead. After all the meanings turmeric has gathered over time, it is calming to return to the field and begin again with something simple. Before turmeric becomes a spice jar, a dye, a ritual substance, or a subject of scientific study, it begins as planted matter in the soil. It begins with a piece of rhizome placed into warm ground and left there to do what it has done for centuries. In ordinary cultivation, turmeric is usually planted not from seed but from pieces of rhizome. A farmer or grower selects healthy sections from an earlier harvest, each one carrying enough stored energy to begin new growth. Those pieces are set into prepared soil, often at the start of a warm, rainy season, or under conditions that give the plant a long stretch of heat ahead. That detail matters. Turmeric does not rush. It needs time, and the person planting it must already be thinking months into the future. Once planted, the real work becomes waiting. Above the surface, leaves rise and spread. The field grows greener. Rain falls. Sun returns. The seasons move forward in their usual way, but the most important change is hidden. Beneath the ground, the rhizome begins expanding, branching, thickening, and storing. The turmeric people eventually slice, boil, dry, and grind is being built gradually out of weather, soil, and patience. Nothing about that process is sudden. It is one of those quiet agricultural rhythms in which time itself becomes part of the crop. That hidden growth is one reason turmeric feels so grounded in the physical world. You cannot hurry an underground plant by staring at it. You cannot watch the main work happening day by day. You trust the leaves, the season, and the knowledge handed down by experience. The field may look still, but below it, the rhizomes are slowly taking shape, finger by finger, swelling into the forms that will later be lifted out of the earth. When harvest finally comes, the work becomes physical again. The soil is opened, the clumps are lifted, mud clings to the rhizomes, roots trail from them. The bright inner plant is still hidden under rough skin and dirt. At this stage, turmeric looks more like something freshly unearthed than something destined for a kitchen shelf. That is an important part of its story too. It spends much of its life close to the earth and close to the hand. Before it becomes clean powder, it is a heavy, damp harvest that has to be handled carefully. Then comes washing. Water removes the soil and reveals the pale outer skin more clearly. The knotted branching shapes become easier to sort and inspect. Some turmeric may be used fresh, but much of it continues on to curing and drying. Depending on local practice and intended use, the rhizomes are often boiled or otherwise cured before drying. This softens them, helps prepare them for long storage, and begins the slow transformation from living underground stem to stable spice material. After that comes drying, and drying takes time too. The washed and treated rhizomes must lose their moisture gradually. This may happen in the sun by controlled heat, or by other methods depending on place and practice. As they dry, the turmeric becomes harder, lighter, and better suited to storage and transport. The fresh rhizome, once soft enough to cut and grate, turns dense and firm. The smell changes, the texture changes. The living wet plant becomes something more durable, something that can wait on shelves, travel across distance, and be ground when needed. Grinding is another transformation. What was once muddy and knotted becomes powder. What was heavy and wet becomes fine and bright. The turmeric most people know begins here, after all the earlier steps have already been completed by fieldwork, weather, water, and labor. Even then, the powder still carries the memory of what it was. It still stains the hand. It still glows with that same yellow-orange intensity. But it now belongs to a new stage of life, one shaped by preparation as much as by growth. That is why patience feels so central to turmeric's story. The plant itself is patient underground. The grower must be patient through the season. The harvested rhizome must be washed, cured, dried, and handled before it becomes ready for wider use. Turmeric does not arrive fully formed. It passes through many states, and each state depends on care. By the time turmeric reaches a kitchen shelf, it has already traveled through warmth, rain, hidden growth, harvest, water, drying air, and many human hands. What looks simple in the jar is really the final form of a long and earthy process, one that begins in dark soil and only slowly becomes gold. By the time turmeric reaches most people, it has already changed form. What began as a living, wet rhizome in the soil has usually been dried, hardened, and ground into powder. That powdered form is so common now that it is easy to forget there is another version of turmeric entirely, one that feels closer to the field, closer to the knife, and closer to the plant's original life underground. Fresh turmeric and powdered turmeric are the same plant, but they do not feel quite the same in the hand, in the air, or in the kitchen. Fresh turmeric looks alive in a way powder never can. The rhizome is firm but still moist, with a thin skin stretched over a dense interior. It can be knotted, crooked, and finger-like, still carrying the irregular shape of something that grew through soil, rather than being shaped by any machine. When cut open, it reveals that deep orange-yellow interior all at once, brighter and wetter than most people expect. The color seems almost concentrated in the flesh, as though light had somehow been packed inside. The smell of fresh turmeric is vivid too. It has the earthy warmth of turmeric powder, but there is more movement in it, more immediacy. It can seem sharper, greener, almost lively, especially just after it is sliced or grated. Powdered turmeric feels calmer by comparison. The drying process softens certain edges and turns the plant into something more settled. The scent is still familiar, but it has become more stable, more even, more ready to disappear into cooking without asking to be noticed on its own. The intensity changes as well. Fresh turmeric often feels brighter and more direct, both in aroma and in the way it behaves when handled. It leaves strong stains quickly. It can color a cutting board or fingertips in moments. When grated into a dish, it carries not only pigment, but moisture and texture. Powdered turmeric is more concentrated in one sense and more distant in another. It has already lost water. It has already been transformed for storage. It enters a dish as a dry ingredient, easier to measure and easier to blend, but less visibly connected to the living plant it once was. That practical difference helps explain why powder became so important. Fresh turmeric is beautiful and immediate, but it is also more limited by time. Like many fresh plant materials, it does not keep forever. It depends more on local access, recent harvest, and careful handling. Powder, by contrast, stores well. It is lighter, drier, easier to move, and far easier to sell, trade, and keep on hand through the year. Once turmeric could be dried and ground into a form that lasted, it became much more portable. That alone helped give it a larger world. Drying changed not only convenience, but use. Fresh turmeric often invites slicing, grating, pounding, or blending into pastes, broths, teas, or fresh mixtures. It still feels like a plant that needs to be handled. Powdered turmeric behaves differently. It can be pinched, spooned, stirred into oil, whisked into soups, folded into rice, or added to spice blends with almost no effort. It became the form most suitable for repetition, and repetition is one of the quiet engines of cultural durability. Once an ingredient can be stored easily and used again and again, without depending on season or immediate harvest, it begins to spread more widely. That spread helped powdered turmeric become the global form of the plant. For many people far from turmeric's growing regions, the powder is turmeric. It is the form sitting in jars, stacked in markets, packed in tins, carried in trade, and built into everyday cooking habits. The fresh rhizome may still feel like a discovery to those same people, a reminder that the spice was once a wet, earthy thing pulled from the ground. But the powder is what made turmeric portable on a large scale. It is what allowed a local tropical rhizome to become part of distant kitchens. And still, the two forms remain closely linked by sensation. Both stain, both glow, both carry the same warm earthiness, even if one speaks more sharply and the other more softly. Both remind the cook that turmeric is not neutral. It changes what it touches. On the board, in the mortar, in the pan, in the hand, the transformation is always visible. That visible transformation is part of the reason turmeric stayed memorable as it moved outward. A fresh rhizome could surprise someone with its color. A dried powder could surprise someone with how quickly it turned a whole dish gold. The plant changed form, but it did not lose its identity. If anything, drying made that identity easier to carry. And that helps explain how one underground plant, once tied so closely to warm soil and local cultivation, became recognizable almost everywhere. The path from rhizome to powder was not only a change in texture, it was the beginning of turmeric's wider life in the world. It is a quiet thing to realize that a plant can begin in one very specific landscape and still find its way into kitchens almost everywhere. Turmeric belongs first to warmth, wet soil, long growing seasons, and the patient work of cultivation in places where such conditions are natural. Its earliest life was local in the deepest sense. It belonged to certain climates, certain fields, certain rhythms of planting and harvest. And yet, over time, that local plant moved outward until it became familiar far beyond the places where it first took root. That is one of the soft wonders of trade. Long-distance exchange does not only move objects, it moves habits, It moves tastes. It moves colors and expectations. A plant that is ordinary in one region can seem remarkable in another. And if it proves useful enough, it slowly becomes ordinary there too. That is how local materials become global habits. Not by losing their identity, but by fitting themselves into new lives. Turmeric did that very well. Its dried form helped, of course. Powder is easier to move than a fresh rhizome heavy with moisture. It stores well, carries color strongly, and can be measured into a dish with very little effort. But turmeric's success also depended on the fact that it was never only one thing. It brought color, flavor, usefulness, and an old sense of trust with it. It could join spice blends, rice dishes, soups, sauces, pickles, and home routines without asking a kitchen to rebuild itself around it. It entered gradually and then stayed. Even now, when turmeric appears in places far from its original agricultural setting, it still carries traces of where it came from. The color speaks first, just as it always did. The earthiness of the flavor still hints at the rhizome underground. The very way people speak about turmeric often carries a memory of age, warmth, and long use, even if they know very little about its early history. A plant does not need to remain in its first field to keep something of that field within it. That lingering trace is important. It reminds us that global ingredients do not become blank once they spread. They still hold the shape of older lives. A spoonful of turmeric in a distant kitchen may seem fully at home there, and in one sense it is. Yet it also carries with it the memory of tropical rain, buried rhizomes, drying yards, trade roads, and households that knew it long before modern shelves and labels existed. In more recent years, turmeric gained yet another kind of global life through the language of wellness. It began appearing not only in traditional cooking or ordinary spice jars, but in drinks, capsules, powders, health products, and modern conversations shaped by trends. In some places, it was spoken about as though it had just been discovered, when in truth, it had already lived beside human beings for roughly 4,000 years. That contrast is striking. A plant of such old familiarity can still be presented as something new if it enters a new style of language. There is something almost amusing in that, but also something revealing. Modern culture often notices old things in sudden bursts. It rediscovers what many people never stopped using. It places bright new attention on habits that were already old in other homes and other regions. Turmeric received that kind of attention partly because it was visually striking, partly because its chemistry drew interest, and partly because global trade had already made it accessible enough to become easy to market. But all of that modern excitement sits on top of a much older reality, one built not on novelty, but on continuity. That older continuity is the more grounding part of turmeric's story. It reminds us that the plant's real strength did not come from a single wave of popularity. It came from slow human closeness, from cooking, from storing, from repeating, from using a little at a time until the little became tradition. The global life turmeric now enjoys is real, but it rests on a far deeper foundation than trend language often suggests. And perhaps that is why turmeric feels so settled, even when it appears in new forms and new markets. It has already survived many changes. It has already moved through food, dye, trade, ritual, healing, and science. It does not need a modern spotlight to justify its place in the world. It had one long before. In the end, though, for all its travel and all its many identities, turmeric remains something remarkably simple. It is still an underground rhizome, still a source of color, still a plant that stains the hand and warms the bowl, still something earthy, quiet, and old, waiting beneath the soil before it ever enters human life at all. In the end, it feels right to return to the simplest image of all. A hand holds a freshly cut piece of turmeric. The outside is rough, pale, and still marked by the soil. The inside is suddenly bright, almost glowing, yellow-orange and dense with color. In that one small object, much of the story has already gathered. The field is there. The long history is there. The kitchen is there. The dye, the trade, the rituals, the science, the memory. All of it is resting quietly inside an ordinary underground rhizome. Perhaps that is the gentlest surprise turmeric offers. It never had to be dramatic to become important. It did not flash through the world like something rare and unreachable. It did not depend on spectacle. It entered human life in quieter ways. A little stirred into food. A little ground into paste. A little carried through markets and homes. A little mixed with black pepper in a pan, creating not only flavor, but a small biochemical story no one could yet name. Turmeric did not become lasting by demanding attention. It became lasting by staying useful, visible, and close. That may be why it has endured for so long. Across roughly 4,000 years of human familiarity, turmeric kept proving itself in more than one way. It fed, it colored, it stored well, it traveled, it marked important moments, it entered household routines, it stayed near the body. Its beauty was practical. Its practicality became meaningful. Over time, those repeated uses gathered into something more durable than novelty ever could. They became trust. And trust in human life is often built from repetition rather than from excitement. Turmeric was handled so often that it became normal. It was seen so often that its color began to carry feeling with it. It was used in so many settings that no single definition could hold it. Spice was true, but not complete. Pigment was true, but not complete. Remedy was true, but not complete. Symbol was true, but not complete. Turmeric remained itself while moving across all those roles, which is one reason it feels so full of quiet mystery even now. The mystery is not that turmeric is unknown. In some ways, it is the opposite. It is known too well to seem mysterious at first. It sits on the shelf. It settles into the background of a meal. It looks familiar enough to stop attracting questions. But if attention returns to it slowly, if the mind stays with the cut rhizome, the stained fingertips, the bowl turned golden, the old fields and trade roads and family kitchens, then the ordinary begins to widen again. What once seemed simple becomes layered. That widening does not need to lead to grand conclusions. It is enough just to notice it. A local tropical plant became part of global cooking. A vivid pigment became a dye and a symbol. A familiar spice became a subject of modern study. A common pairing with black pepper turned out to reflect something real about absorption and the body. None of these things made turmeric less humble. If anything, they made its humility more striking. The plant never changed its nature to carry all these meanings. It remained what it was from the beginning, a buried stem storing color in darkness. There is something restful in that image. So much of what matters in human life grows quietly. It gathers worth over time. It stays near the hand. It proves itself not through noise but through return. Turmeric belongs to that category of things. It is not loud. It is not rare in the dramatic sense. It is earthy, golden, and familiar. Yet for that very reason, it has had the chance to touch many parts of life and remain there. And perhaps that is what makes it worth lingering over in the first place. Not because it is exotic, and not because it promises too much, but because it shows how an ordinary material can gather beauty, usefulness, and meaning slowly enough that people stop seeing the miracle in it. A root-like rhizome under warm soil, a powder on the shelf, a bright trace on the hand, a memory in the kitchen, a small sign that some of the most enduring companions in human history were never loud or grand at all. They were simply there, season after season, hand after hand, century after century, waiting to be noticed again. Quiet, earthy, and golden,